So the war is over. But it's also the beginning of a difficult time in American history. There were so many questions left unanswered. Should the slaveholding Southerners be punished or should they be forgiven? What rights should be given to these freed black men? And how could the war-torn nation be brought back together? And those are the questions that Reconstruction tries to answer. In this video, the important items are in red. Only write the things that are red. So, Reconstruction. Let's start with that. It's a key term. It's a period of rebuilding the South. Now, the war had left the South with enormous problems. Towns and cities were in ruins. You can see the image in the background. That's a city. Used to be anyway. Plantations had been burned. Bridges, roads, railroads were destroyed. In the South, there were 258,000 who had died, and 1,000 more were sick and injured. That meant families were required to rebuild without the help of adult males and without resources, money. Now, most in the United States did agree, and we are back to being the United States after the war, that the South needed rebuilding. We agree to that. So President Lincoln comes up with a plan. He calls it the 10% plan. It is just that. 10% of the voters of a state take an oath of loyalty. The state forms a new government. They adopt a new constitution. All of this. Lincoln, in his mind, you could not punish the South. There is no useful purpose for punishing the South. And how would you heal this nation if you held one side accountable and blamed them? He, in fact, offered amnesty to all white Southerners. They're not going to be held for any sort of crime. The exception was rebel leaders. Jefferson Davis will be tried. He also supported giving suffrage to blacks who were educated or in the Union Army. Notice he's not giving suffrage to all blacks. This was very, very, very important because nobody in American society is really ready to give blacks equal rights at this point. Northerners might not like slavery, but they don't want blacks to be equal to them. In 1864, 3 states, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Tennessee, were ready to be readmitted under Lincoln's plan. The problem was there was a rival plan put together by radical Republicans who thought that Lincoln was too nice. And they determined that Congress, the legislative body elected by the people, representing the states, should control Reconstruction. They favored a tougher and more radical approach. In fact, they said Southern institutions must be broken up and relaid, or all our blood and treasure have been spent in vain. We have to completely destroy and put back together a society that meets Northern approval. So because of this, Congress voted to deny those 3 states that had put together a plan, a state constitution under Lincoln's plan. So what we have next is the Wade-Davis bill. Lincoln knows he's going to have to make some sort of compromise, but not yet, because the Wade-Davis bill is the rival plan. This is the plan of those radical Republicans. It says half of all white males had to swear loyalty. Remember, Lincoln's was only 10%. A state constitutional convention could be held, but only white males could vote, and they had to have supported the Union. Very important key. Former rebels were denied the right to ever hold public office, and this constitutional convention had to adopt a constitution that abolished slavery. Now, Lincoln refused to sign the bill, and again, he knows he has to compromise with the radical Republicans. Unfortunately, he doesn't ever get that opportunity. Assassination. You've probably heard the story. On the evening of April 14th, 1865, President and Mr. Lincoln attended a play at Ford's Theater in which John Wilkes Booth, who was an actor and a rebel sympathizer, no real shock that he was in the building that night. He knew everybody. He had performed at Ford's Theater very often. Entered the back of their box and shot President Lincoln in the back of the head. He managed to escape. Initially, nobody reacted to the shot because they thought it was part of the play. Then Mrs. Lincoln began screaming. John Wilkes Booth jumped from the balcony onto the stage. He breaks his leg in his escape, but he does manage to escape. Now, Booth would meet his end. He was shot by federal forces when he refused to surrender, but he was not located in Washington, D.C. He had made it out of the city and was quite a distance for being a man on a broken leg. Now, news of Lincoln's assassination shocked the nation completely. Blacks mourned the death of the man who had helped them fight for freedom and win their freedom. And Northern whites grieved for the leader who saved the Union. What is often not discussed is there was a much larger plan. This is a rendition of this incident of the assassination. It was published in the newspapers in 1865. This again, another newspaper article. Lincoln did not die immediately. It took overnight. This is the only known image of Lincoln in his casket. He was being honored with a state funeral. Only known image. There was very explicit directions that there would never be any images taken of President Lincoln in this state. And somebody managed to sneak a camera in. He was actually in a balcony far away from the guards. Again, the only image, and it was not found until the 1960s, 1970s, something like that. So the plan, there's John Wilkes Booth, the leader, so to speak, the organizer. The goal was to completely eliminate the U.S. government. If they did that, the South would win. The South would win. Remember, Lincoln is assassinated April 14th. Davis is not captured until May 10th. So this idea of the war being over is not complete. Yes, Lee had surrendered to Grant, but when you have the leader of their rebel forces, their president, still on the loose, it is not officially over. So on the night of the assassination, a fellow conspirator attacked the Secretary of State, William Seward, wounded him very seriously, and I believe killed his son. Another conspirator was to kill Vice President Andrew Johnson, but Johnson made a last-minute decision to change his original plans. He was going to go out to dinner. Everybody knew that he was going out to dinner. The conspirator, the would-be assassinator, was at the dinner location. Johnson never shows up, and this guy just disappears, so to speak. These are the faces. 8 people were convicted of taking part in this plot. Notice the woman, Mrs. Mary Surratt, and notice that John Wilkes Booth is not included because he was killed. So he does not go to trial over any of this. 4 of these, including Mary Surratt, were hung and the other 4 were sentenced to life imprisonment.